Welcome to the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast, where we celebrate the craft of poetry. Each week we feature interviews with incredible poets, songwriters, and artists, including Olivia Gatwood, Safia El Hilo, Dana Joya, and many more. We also feature periodic submitted poetry episodes. Visit viewlesswings.com to submit your original poetry. I'm your host, James Moorhead, Poet Laureate of Dublin, California, and author of Canvas, Portraits of Red and Gray, and The Plague Doctor. Hit subscribe and follow me on Instagram or Threads at Viewless Wings. On this week's episode of the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast, we are featuring poems submitted to Viewless Wings and read by the authors. We love providing a platform for poets to share their words on viewlesswings.com and their voices on the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast. Visit viewlesswings.com to learn more about how to submit your poem for a future episode, or find Viewless Wings on submittable.com. And now we turn the mic over to our first featured poet.
Kia ora. I'm Cerid Jones, and I'm a lifelong closeted writer who's only just learning how to be brave enough to share my musings. I'm a lover of folk tales and myth and hail all the way from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I grew up in a house where there were more books than wall space and fae at the bottom of the garden, so I've always been a creature who's had a passion for the arts and literature. I hold multiple degrees in art and creativity, English literature, anthropology, among other things. And I read anything that transports me elsewhere or delves deep into the psyche of human nature. I gave up a career in art and have now found a home working in the publishing industry and, on the side, teaching people how to throw axes, which is why my voice is a little huskier than usual. It is my absolute honour to read for you a poem today, which was my first official publication. It is a lyrical style poem on the theme of relationships, which should be relatively self-explanatory. It is called Tell Me Again. Tell me again how you do not love me. Tell me slowly, softly. Tell me how you do not ache for the space between us to fold in on itself like a smothered flame. Tell me again how you do not see me as an answer to the dull hum in your head. Tell me slowly, softly. Tell me you do not dream of me, how there is no room in the vacant corridor you hold under your ribcage for me to waltz in. Tell me, softly, slowly, that my skin did not comfort the ache in your bones. Tell me again, you do not want me. Tell me again. Tell me over and over that I was not made of the light you look for in your shadows. Tell me slowly. Tell me softly. And each word you say in refusal of me, I will hold under the palate of my tongue and taste and savour and feel dissolve. And when it reaches my clavicle, I will let them bloom across my breastplate. Tell me softly. Tell me slowly you do not love me, so I might remember how you did. And that memory becomes stronger than the wound you left me with. So tell me again, my love, how you do not want me. Tell me softly, tell me slowly, and let me drink you in again.
Hi, my name is Lori Rottenberg, and I'm a writer who lives in Arlington, Virginia. I've published poetry in a bunch of different journals and anthologies, most recently in Minion, Bergian, Washington Writers Publishing House Writes, open a Journal of Arts and Letters, the Jewish Writing Project, and Artemis. I also have work upcoming this spring in December magazine, and my poetry and nonfiction have been shared nationally on the Unitarian Universalist for Jewish Awareness website. One of my poems was picked for the 2021 Arlington Moving Words competition and appeared on county buses, and I served as a visiting poet in the Arlington Public Schools Pick a Poet program for over a decade. I'm currently a senior instructor at George Mason University, where I teach writing to international students and poetry to students in the Honors College. I'm in my last year of studies at the George Mason University MFA Poetry program, and thanks again for having me on Viewless Wings today. I wrote this poem in honor of my grandparents, Margaret and Zygmunt Rottenberg, who were refugees from Nazi Germany and who helped raise me. They had very memorable rituals for their nightly dinners, which I share in this poem. Meals with Grandma and Grandpa. It is no wonder they clung to these precise sacraments. Dinners time not to hunger, but the clock, always at 6, unchangeable as Shabbat, as the Shema, as the book of history telling our people's sad stories again and again. Before main meals, melon in summer, grapefruit in winter, graceful shadows of multi-course morsels served by German maids. China, cloth, silver, never disposable, a strict grammar of repast. Knives had to face politely in, keeping edges to ourselves, cut flowers centering us on these rites, vestiges, continental elegance they once knew. Such exquisite planners, they hadn't foreseen this life and ocean away. Outsiders forever working with their hands to help build the American century in whose sunset I sat. I was instructed in this order, a novitiate, my grandfather calling me to lay the service, wash dishes as offering, everyone apart. They spoke English always. My heart burst to hear uvular R's, to remember birthdays, yellow desserts said like the color of late afternoon sunbeams, streaming on my grandmother, on her African violets blooming in rows on the windowsill.
Hi, everybody. My name's Caroline Wellman. I live in the U.S. I live across the river from Hannibal, Missouri, which is Mark Twain's hometown. I had a collection of poetry called Presences published by Parallel Press in 2014, and my recent poems have appeared in Anthology, Peat Smoke Journal, and Seashores International Haiku Journal. I currently work for the U.S. Postal Service. A little bit about my poem. It was inspired by something I saw in a little store here. We have stores called dollar stores. They have very cheap basic things. They also have some very unusual, wonderful things. And I saw the word Aves on the cover of a coloring book there, above beautiful pictures of birds. So all kinds of associations started happening in my head. I really don't know Spanish, so I hadn't made the connection until then. And I love birds too, so that helped too. Okay, I'm going to read the poem now. Thanks for listening. The Aves of Morning. In Spanish, the birds become prayers. Whatever they lift, their trills, their wings, a soaring novena. Consider the housefinch's handful of notes, the bright, delighted laugh of a child floated out from the dogwood blossoms. Consider the redwing who chimes from the fence in the rain, despite the trees raised behind it, the creek filled with dirt. Consider the cardinal's sweet clips, quick snips of floral shears, the blue jay's trinity of soft tulilis belled from the sumac. When night becomes my Gethsemane, laying me bare so I wake to no hope, the cold dark all around me, their matins bring back the glory of this world, before I see the least splinter of light, long before dawn builds its vast cathedral. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Özge Lena. I'm a poet and a writer with a published novella titled Autopsy and my poems have appeared in poetry magazines of different countries such as the UK, the USA, Canada, Iceland, and France, and were shortlisted 3 times by international poetry competitions. I'm going to read my poem Nameless Things for Waveless Wings, which was written after a dark dream. Nameless Things. Did you know that carnations smelled of death? I plucked their petals. I dug the earth, dug deep and deep and deep until I pulled the tiny thin bones and the miniature skull out. Once you built a grave for my sorrow in the garden. You said if we planted that littleness in there, carnations would blossom in the color of her blood. Then we had carnation jam, which we named reincarnation for 33 breakfasts. But this was before you left me. I sunstroked them during 7 suns and glued into each other to form a dwarf scarecrow. I named it Phantom, as in the word fantasy, of her standing next to me, calling Mommy, Mommy. Did you know that naming is taming? Once you called me honey and you touched my flabby belly, saying we could fill this void with whatever we would like. I hated round things and liked the scabs of my razor cuts that I named arrows, and I ate them for 13 dusks. But this was also before you left me. I planted it in the garden to scare the emptiness you left behind. I built a square fence around to name it tetrameter. Did you know that I still dread round things and nameless things like you? I could never name the blankness of your absence for 7 full moons. But now, in my nightest nights, I often think phantom may well fit in you, calling from my dreams, honey, honey. Did you know that I was allergic to it? Thank you for listening.
Good evening. My name is Kenya McDonald. I'm also known as K-Mac. I am a poet. I'm also a former teacher who now lives in Tennessee. I've been writing poetry most of all my life. I enjoy all aspects of creative ventures. So this poem, Broken Glass, is one of my favorites. It's about the ills of society, how sometimes people's communities are ignored even though they are in dire straits and they need funding and help to build a community. So the name of my poem again is called Broken Glass. How can you build a community from broken glass? Giving the people plants that won't last. Political zebras talking fast, 'cause they ain't up to the task. So how can you save the community covered in glass? And there are those with mouths full of ashes and leaves, kneeling, praising God like they do a good deed. So how can you save a community covered in glass? Covered in glass. How can you save a community covered in glass? Covered in glass. They grease palms of those running for cover while police sirens and helicopters continue to hover. Sewers filled with gutter rats running the street. Beady eyes watch as black men still bleed. So how can you save the community covered in glass? Covered in glass. As changes go slow, except for the upper class. As changes go slow, except for the upper class. Broken glass, broken glass, broken glass, broken glass. So how can you save the community from broken glass? Broken glass. As changes go slow, except for the upper class. As changes go slow, except for the upper class. Thank you for listening.
The Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast is written and produced by James Moorhead. You can follow me on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at Viewless Wings. Hit subscribe to be notified of every episode of the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast and spread the word with your poetry community.